So we're now going to take another pass through an overview of Eureka. And there's a reason why we're doing this, even though we've covered this earlier, because I'm going to give you some better information now that I didn't have at my disposal. And we're also going to show some more thorough documentation of how things work with Eureka, courtesy of ChatGPT, which is very smart at being able to explain things that don't require hours and hours of tedious searching through the web and Googling. So we're going to talk about the structure and functionality of the Eureka Discovery Service and also then kind of outline how it's used here and understand how we use it in the context of our QuoteServices app. The code that we use to configure Eureka is almost entirely declarative. There's a little teeny piece you have to write by hand, but it's absolutely trivial. So just to recap, Eureka is a discovery service. Eureka means I have found it in Greek. If you're a fan of Shakespeare, you could say it's all Greek to me. But Eureka basically is a way of being able to find things. And what it enables to be found, it enables an API gateway to find and communicate with back-end microservices. Now, you can use it for other stuff too, but that's what we're using it for here. And you're definitely going to see now that you don't have to hard code ports or host names. The microservices are entirely agnostic as to the port number and host names that they use. That's set by Eureka, or used in collaboration with other stuff by Eureka. That, of course, implies that the Eureka microservice has to start prior to the microservices that use it. No surprise there. This particular use case uses what's called a server-side discovery pattern. That just means that these things are all hidden from the client. The gateway is what's doing all this stuff. And it's essentially a black box. So clients don't know, don't care, can't know, can't care how the back-end microservices are actually deployed. That's up to the people doing the deployment and orchestration on the client, on the server side. So the way this works, of course, is the back-end microservices have to interact with Eureka and its service registry when they start up. And that, of course, is done declaratively, which is really cool. So we're going to have the gateway and the handy and zippy microservices all interact in various ways with the microservice once it's been launched and once they've been launched. They're going to be slightly different. The gateway interacts with Eureka in a slightly different way than the microservices. But again, it's all declarative and easy to understand. It's declarative. The way that the Eureka microservice works is by having Spring annotations. So you can say, this class, Eureka application, uses the Eureka server features by using the @enable Eureka server annotation. So that says, this is now a Eureka server. Thank you very much. And we've also got some YAML files. And these are some things that the Eureka microservice uses to specify what it cares about from its perspective. So this is a YAML file that says, this microservice listens at port 8761. Can I just pick a port that's in the right range for application ports? And this says that this particular Eureka instance will run on the local host, and it wants to use IP addresses instead of host names. The reason you would want to do that is if you use host names, then you have to do reverse DNS lookup to find out the IP address, which takes extra time, so it just uses IP addresses to know how to go more directly to something, which is all, again, hidden from you. What we also say is we say, don't register this version of Eureka with any other versions. You can actually have federated name services and discovery services with Eureka and Spring. We don't need that for our simple example, but you can do it. But we're telling it, don't bother with this. And then the last thing, which I don't really show here, is the default zone, which is basically just saying we're on the local host, listening at this port, and we're the Eureka service. And of course, how did I get this nice documentation? I cut and pasted this into ChatGPT and said, please explain to me what this does. And it told me, and then I summarized it. So great way to learn when you're given a piece of code, and there's a bunch of stuff in there that works, but you're not really sure quite what it does because someone else did it for you. This is a good way to figure out what it's doing and then be able to understand it, so when you go to a next project, you're in a better position to use those configurations properly. Now, zippy and handy microservices also use YAML property files to register themselves with Eureka. And I'm just showing this here because it helps to see the context, and it also helps to see what Eureka is doing for us. So here's the YAML file for the zippy microservice. So what it's doing is it's saying, have this service listen on port 0. And what port 0 says is it says, let Eureka figure out the port. So whenever you put a 0 here, it basically says, I don't want to define my port number. Let Eureka do it. And then it says, hey, Eureka, I want to be a client of yours. Thank you very much. So we say Eureka client enabled, true. And my name is Zippy. So what that's going to do is when this program starts up, it's going to go out, it's going to find the Eureka name service, it's going to register itself under the name Zippy, and it's going to say, I would like my port to be 0, which is a flag to Eureka that says, you figure out what port to run me on. And then Eureka just picks an available port, so you don't have to worry about port collisions. And it picks an available port, and then this microservice will run on that port. And you can figure out what port you're running on if you take a look when the program actually starts up. When the microservice starts up, if you look at the little window in the Run tab under that name, it'll tell you what port it started at. And that was because Eureka picked that port for it. So then the gateway uses Eureka to locate other microservices that it encapsulates from clients by their name. And here's what the gateway does, which is pretty cool. This is the gateway's YAML file. So the gateway says, I'm the gateway, and I want to connect to the discovery service, Eureka. So I want to be a Eureka, you'll see it down here. I want to be a Eureka client, and I'm going to get the information to route the requests that come to me from Eureka. So we say gateway, cloud, discovery, locator, enabled, true. And so that's basically saying, I want to use Eureka to tell me where to go. This is in lieu of having to write this code manually the way we had done before, where you actually provide the routes and you hard code those routes. And then down here, this says that the gateway acts as a consumer of the Eureka registry. So it's a client, but it does not participate in the registry itself. So the gateway is not registered with Eureka. So we're going to be a client because we want to be able to figure out where the other microservices are, but we are not registering with Eureka, and we don't need the registry, a copy of it. We're going to ask Eureka. It'll give that to us as stuff occurs. So once again, I used ChatGPT to figure out what these things meant, and if you read the code, you'll see I documented them very thoroughly using the documentation that came back. I probably could have figured this out other ways if I didn't have ChatGPT, but this made it really fast. I just basically cut and pasted that in and said, what does this do? And it gave me the documentation, which was very helpful. So at runtime, when requests come in, the gateway will then transparently forward the request to the designated microservice based on the information it got from the Eureka microservice when it communicated with it as a client. So that's the end of the overview of Eureka, and you now have a much deeper understanding of how it works, and you can see it's almost entirely declarative, it's very simple, and it works and plays nicely with other elements of Spring, which is what makes it so powerful as a reusable microservice in its own right.